Ella Monroe learned early how to become invisible. She moved through crowded rooms without leaving a trace, her presence measured only by how efficiently she completed what was asked of her. On the night of the Harrington Foundation Gala, invisibility was part of the job. Temporary staff were meant to serve, smile, and disappear. Ella did all three with practiced ease. The ballroom glowed with restrained elegance, soft lights, polished floors, conversations that sounded important without saying much at all. Ella carried trays of glasses between clusters of guests who wore confidence as easily as their tailored suits. She noticed details others ignored. The way hands tightened around crystal stems, the way laughter arrived a second too late. Wealth, she realized, did not protect people from loneliness. It simply taught them how to hide it better. Lucas Harrington stood apart from the crowd, a figure others orbited but never touched. As CEO of Harrington Industries, he was accustomed to being watched, admired, and obeyed. Tonight, he felt none of it. His fiancée, Victoria Harrington, moved gracefully from conversation to conversation, flawless and distant. She smiled when required, touched his arm when photographers appeared, and returned to her carefully constructed world the moment attention drifted away. They looked perfect together. They felt like strangers. Lucas accepted a glass from Ella without really seeing her at first. His thoughts were elsewhere, caught in the familiar weight of expectation. When he finally looked up to thank her, something in her expression made him pause. She wasn't awed by him. She wasn't calculating or impressed or eager. She simply met his gaze with quiet composure, as if he were just another man in need of a drink. "Thank you," he said, more sincerely than he intended. "You're welcome," Ella replied, already stepping away to watch her go, unsettled by the brief exchange. It had been simple, almost insignificant, yet it cut through the evening's noise. For the first time that night, Lucas felt present. Later, a sudden storm disrupted the gala's carefully planned rhythm. Thunder rattled the tall windows, and rain lashed against the glass with unexpected force. Guests murmured, checking their phones, adjusting schedules. Staff were instructed to wait until the worst passed. Ella found herself standing near the side exit, clutching her jacket and calculating how long she could afford to be late for her second job. Lucas stepped away from a tense conversation with Victoria, his jaw tight. He noticed Ella again, standing alone, her shoulders slightly hunched as if bracing against more than just the weather. Without fully understanding why, he approached her. "You're waiting for the storm to pass too?" he asked. Ella nodded. "Public transport doesn't love surprises." A faint smile crossed his face. "Neither do I." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the rain. The distance between them felt smaller than it should have. Ella was aware of who he was. His name was impossible to avoid. Still, she spoke to him without caution, answering his questions simply, honestly. She told him she worked wherever work was available. He told her he was tired. Neither explained further, yet both understood. Lucas found himself talking more than he had intended, about responsibility, about decisions made long ago that now felt permanent. Ella listened without judgment, her presence steady. She spoke of resilience, not as a virtue, but as necessity. There was no flirtation, no promises, only two people briefly allowing themselves to be real. When the storm worsened, the staff supervisor dismissed the temporary workers, advising them to wait inside until it was safe. Ella hesitative. Her phone showed missed calls, reminders of obligations she couldn't ignore. Lucas noticed her unease. "There's a service entrance with a covered walkway," he said. "At least you won't get soaked." She agreed reluctantly. The corridor was quiet, far removed from the gala's glittering center. The silence felt heavier here, more honest. Ella thanked him again, preparing to leave. Lucas should have let her go. He knew that. Instead, he lingered, caught in the unfamiliar comfort of being understood without explanation. What followed was not planned, nor was it dramatic. It was a moment shaped by exhaustion, emotional neglect, and the dangerous relief of being seen. When morning arrived, clarity came with it. The consequences, still invisible, waited patiently. Ella left before the house fully woke, her decision swift and final. She told herself it was a mistake born of circumstance, nothing more. Lucas woke to emptiness and the sharp awareness of having crossed a line he could not redraw. Neither exchanged promises. Neither spoke of the future. As Ella stepped into the early morning light, she believed she was walking away from a single night that would fade into memory. She did not look back. She did not know that something irreversible had already begun, quietly reshaping both their lives. Ella Monroe noticed the changes in her body before she allowed herself to name them. Fatigue lingered longer than it should have. Food smells turned sharp and unbearable. Time itself felt different, stretching in strange, uneasy ways. She told herself it was stress, the cost of working too many hours and sleeping too little. Denial was easier than certainty. When certainty arrived, it did not announce itself gently. The thin strip in her hand confirmed what her instincts already knew. Ella sat on the edge of her bed, the room quiet except for the distant hum of traffic, and felt the weight of the world settle into her chest. One night, one mistake she had sworn to bury, and now, a life growing silently inside her. Her first thought was not fear, but resolve. Ella had survived on her own for as long as she could remember. She had learned not to expect rescue, not to rely on promises that dissolved under pressure. Lucas Harrington existed in a world built on power and permanence. She did not. Whatever had happened between them belonged to the past. This child, however, belonged to the future, and to her. She did not try to find him. She did not search his name online, though it would have been effortless. Instead, Ella made practical decisions. She left the small apartment where memories lingered too loudly and moved in with her cousin Grace Monroe, whose concern showed more in actions than words. Grace asked questions once, carefully, and accepted Ella's answers without pushing further. Support, Ella learned, did not always require explanations. Work became both refuge and burden. Ella took extra shifts, saved every possible dollar, and planned relentlessly. At night, when exhaustion pressed hard against her resolve, doubt crept in. She wondered if silence was strength or cowardice. Each time, she returned to the same conclusion. Contacting Lucas would only complicate something she was determined to protect. Across the city, Lucas Harrington felt a restlessness he could not discipline away. The gala night replayed itself in fragments. Ella's steady voice, her lack of expectation, the quiet clarity he had felt in her presence. He tried to dismiss it as regret, an echo of a poor decision. But regret did not usually follow him into boardrooms or linger during meetings. This did. His engagement to Victoria unraveled without spectacle. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confessions. Instead, there was an accumulation of distance that could no longer be ignored. Victoria accused him not of infidelity, but of absence. "You were somewhere else long before that night," she said, her composure cracking just enough to reveal truth. Lucas did not argue. He ended the engagement knowing it was overdue, yet feeling no relief. What unsettled him most was not the breakup, but the emptiness that followed. Power returned. Control remained intact. Satisfaction did not. He searched crowds without realizing it, listening for a voice that did not belong to his world. He questioned himself in quiet moments, wondering why a woman whose last name he did not even know had altered his sense of balance so completely. Weeks passed. The city moved on. Ella's world narrowed to doctor appointments, work schedules, and the steady rhythm of preparation. She learned the sound of her own courage, how it wavered and then returned stronger. Still, there were nights when she placed a hand over her abdomen and allowed herself a single, fragile thought of what might have been different. Lucas reached a point where memory was no longer enough. He began asking questions, not publicly, not recklessly, but with intent. He spoke to his assistant, Mason Reed, framing the request as unfinished business rather than obsession. Mason listened carefully, aware that Lucas rarely chased ghosts. "I don't need details," Lucas said. "I need truth. Find her." Mason hesitated only a moment before nodding. He had seen many sides of his employer, But this was new. Not command, not arrogance, but something close to urgency. Lucas did not know what he expected to find. He only knew that leaving the past untouched no longer felt possible. That same evening, Ella stood by the window of Grace's apartment, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Her future remained uncertain, but it was hers. She believed she had closed the door on a chapter that did not belong to her life anymore. In another part of the city, Lucas Harrington stared at his phone long after the screen went dark, aware that he had just set something irreversible in motion. Neither of them knew how close their paths were to crossing again. What they shared once had not ended. It had only been waiting to be acknowledged. Mason Reed worked methodically, not because the task was difficult, but because it required discretion. He followed small details rather than dramatic leads. Employment records tied to temporary agencies, a change of address request filed quietly, a pattern of overtime that suggested necessity rather than ambition. Ella Monroe did not want to be found, and Mason respected that instinct even as he dismantled it. When he finally located her, it was not in a place of desperation, but of determination. A modest apartment, a predictable routine, a life built carefully around limitations. Mason reported only what mattered. "She's stable," he told Lucas Harrington, "and she's pregnant." The word struck with an immediacy Lucas had not anticipated. Pregnant. The syllables rearranged his understanding of the past months with ruthless efficiency. The unease, the persistence of memory, the sense of unfinished consequence. None of it had been abstract after all. He thanked Mason and ended the call without further questions. Some truths required no elaboration. Lucas did not announce his visit. He arrived alone, without the trappings of status that usually preceded him. When Ella opened the door, recognition flickered across her face, followed by something steadier and more guarded. She did not ask how he found her. She already knew. "You shouldn't be here," Ella said calmly. "I know," Lucas replied. "But I am." Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Ella stepped aside eventually, allowing him into a space that reflected her. Orderly, restrained, purposeful. Lucas noticed the subtle accommodations, the way furniture had been rearranged, the quiet evidence of preparation. There was no denial left to cling to. "You weren't supposed to know," Ella said after a moment. "That wasn't your decision to make alone," Lucas answered, then softened. "Neither was it mine." She met his gaze, her expression firm. "I didn't disappear to punish you. I left because I understood the difference between our worlds. I wasn't going to build a future on borrowed stability." Lucas absorbed her words without interruption. For the first time in years, he felt stripped of defense. "I didn't come to offer ownership," he said. "I came to accept responsibility." Ella folded her arms, a protective gesture more than a defensive one. "Responsibility doesn't mean control. I won't be managed. Not by you. Not by anyone. I'm not asking to manage you," Lucas replied. "I'm asking not to be excluded from something I helped create." The truth sat between them, undeniable and unfinished. Ella's resolve wavered only slightly, but Lucas noticed. He understood then that strength did not eliminate fear. It simply learned to coexist with it. The interruption came quietly. A knock at the door, unexpected, but not entirely surprising. Victoria Harrington stood in the hallway, impeccably composed, her eyes sharp with understanding rather than accusation. She had followed questions of her own to their conclusion. "So this is where honesty lives," Victoria said, surveying the room. Lucas did not step forward. He did not apologize. He allowed the moment to unfold without interference. Victoria's gaze moved from him to Ella, then settled briefly on the curve of Ella's abdomen. The realization was immediate. "This," Victoria said softly, "is why you were already gone." She did not raise her voice. She did not demand explanations. She simply nodded once, as if confirming what she had already accepted. "I hope," she added, turning to Ella, "that you don't mistake distance for indifference. I was never prepared to compete with something real." With that, Victoria left, closing the door on a chapter that no longer belonged to her. The room felt quieter after her departure, stripped of tension that had never fully dissipated. Ella exhaled slowly. This is exactly why I stayed silent. Lucas stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. And it's exactly why silence won't work anymore. He did not reach for her. He did not make promises. He simply stood there, present and unguarded, allowing her to decide what came next. Ella looked at him, weighing the cost of trust against the exhaustion of isolation. This doesn't end neatly, she said. I'm not asking it to, Lucas replied. I'm asking for the chance to do this without running. Ella turned toward the window, watching the city move without regard for their standoff. When she finally spoke, her voice carried neither surrender nor defiance, but something closer to cautious resolve. Then understand this, she said. I don't need saving. If you stay, it's because you choose to. Every day. Lucas nodded, the simplicity of her condition grounding him more than any contract ever had. The past had caught up with him at last. What remained was not certainty, but possibility, fragile, demanding, and impossible to ignore. Time did not soften everything, but it clarified what mattered. Lucas Harrington did not move into Ella Monroe's life with grand gestures or public declarations. Instead, he adjusted his presence to fit the boundaries she set. He showed up when invited. He listened more than he spoke. For a man accustomed to command, restraint became his first act of change. Ella watched him closely, not with suspicion, but with discernment. She had learned that consistency revealed character more accurately than charm. Lucas attended medical appointments without assuming authority, sat quietly during conversations with Grace Monroe, and accepted correction without defensiveness. Each small act stitched together something fragile but real. The world Lucas inhabited did not make this easy. Board members questioned his shifting priorities. Invitations went unanswered. Headlines speculated. He allowed the noise to exist without responding to it. For the first time, his choices were not designed for approval. They were deliberate, and they were costly that Ella's confidence grew in unexpected ways. Pregnancy did not diminish her independence. It refined it. She resumed part-time work on her terms, planned for the future with precision, and refused offers that felt like obligation disguised as generosity. Lucas learned that supporting her meant respecting her autonomy, even when it challenged his instincts. When the child arrived, it was without spectacle. No cameras, no announcements, just quiet urgency, steady hands, and a moment that reordered everything Lucas thought he understood about success. Holding his child, he felt the unmistakable gravity of permanence. Not possession, but responsibility that could not be delegated. Ella watched him carefully in that moment. Not for declarations of love, but for presence. He did not make promises. He stayed. Weeks passed. Sleep became scarce. Life narrowed to essentials. Lucas learned the rhythm of nights that did not bend to schedules and days that demanded patience rather than efficiency. Ella allowed herself to lean on him. Not fully, not blindly, but enough to acknowledge partnership. They did not rewrite the past. They did not pretend infidelity had been romantic or justified. It remained what it was, a fracture born of emotional neglect and poor choice. What followed mattered more. Accountability replaced avoidance. Growth replaced regret. One evening, as the city settled into its familiar hum, Ella stood by the window with the child resting against her shoulder. Lucas joined her, leaving space between them that no longer felt like distance. This isn't a fairy tale, Ella said quietly. I know, Lucas replied. She turned to face him, her expression calm but resolute. If we do this, it's not because of history. It's because of what we build now. Lucas met her gaze, understanding the weight of her condition. Then we build it honestly. The future remained uncertain. It would demand effort, humility, and choices made without guarantees. But as they stood there, no longer running, no longer hiding, it felt possible. Not perfect, not easy, just real.